Throwing hardball tactics back in the face of a professional provocateur is risky business unless you have practiced. You may learn how to do it theoretically, but without practice you're likely to modify the techniques just enough so that you botch them under pressure. Too much or too little emphasis on certain words, a telling facial expression, sitting with each other during a meeting, all of these things can give away your hand, which you don't want to do. So with these caveats in mind, let's just move along. One problem is that most of us don't think like direct marketing agents. We've heard about marketing packages. Well, that's the thing here. Our adversaries do think like direct marketing agents. We care about integrity. That is, the end doesn't always justify the means. The opposition doesn't. We worry that others might get hurt if we speak out. The education establishment, for example, doesn't give one hoot who gets hurt in the process. Whether it's magazines, billboards, brochures, newspaper columns, speeches, press conferences, grant proposals, psychological impact is paramount to our opposition. Not the facts, not anybody's precious principles, and certainly not right or wrong. If you've read my book, Cloning of the American Mind, you're somewhat familiar with rigged consensus building. But for those who aren't, a little background is in order. The dictionary definition of a consensus is group solidarity in sentiment and belief and or general agreement. Unanimity, on the other hand, is defined as collective opinion. Increasingly, people are hearing the term consensus, when what our opponents want in reality is unanimity or uniform thinking. All consensus building is based upon one of the principles of the German philosopher Hegel from 1770 to 1831. In plain English, this principle states that you could take one firm view and its opposite, combine them, and come up with a brand new viewpoint, which will be a synthesis of the two. This new viewpoint will be one that all parties supposedly will accept. So, a consensus is generally or essentially a collective opinion that doesn't reflect anyone's opinion. Okay? When the collective good is viewed as superior to or more important than the individual good as per the socialist globalist view, then consensus no longer falls into the category of a compromise. Consensus is a stronger term because the pro and con viewpoints in the collectivist mindset no longer exist. The rightness or wrongness of the original viewpoints are not an issue. The point is to produce a new ideal, opinion, or value that will be universally supported, or at least appear to be supported by everyone. And that's the rub. Appears to be. The purpose of the various consensus strategies is to preserve the illusion that there is lay or community participation in policy-related decision-making when in fact there isn't. That means something far different from working out a compromise. When a professional provocateur is trying to gain acceptance of, say, a gay-lesbian club at your local high school, they know they have to at least pretend to involve the community in that decision and have something to that effect in writing when people complain to their legislators in Congress. The Delphi technique is just one unethical method of achieving consensus on controversial topics. A well-trained professional agitator is deliberately escalating tensions all the time among group members, pitting one faction against the other to make one side appear ridiculous and the other side sensible. The setting or type of group in which the technique is used is immaterial. The logic behind its success is that most groups tend to share a particular knowledge base and display a finite set of identifiable characteristics. What the provocateur must do is locate those smaller factions within the larger group. Provocateurs often call themselves facilitators because that sounds neutral. But what these pros really do is work the group over and ensure a predetermined outcome, what they call a consensus. If the discussion is facilitated properly, all participants will emerge believing that the decision was reached was their own idea. Only later, sometimes only an hour later, will they realize they've been duped. Donning his or her facilitator hat, the provocateur encourages each person in a group to express concerns about a program, project, or policy. She listens attentively, elicits input from group members, forms task forces, urges participants to make lists. And in going through all this talk and motions, she learns something about each member of the group. She's looking for each raised eyebrow. She's looking at your body language. The agitator-facilitator is trained to identify the leaders, the loudmouths, the weak or non-committal members, and those who are apt to change ideas during an argument, change their sides. The provocateur first will try to become an accepted member of your group. Then later will turn the factions of the group against its own members. Suddenly the amiable facilitator will become devil's advocate. Using the divide and conquer principle, she pits one faction against the other, and those views that are not desired will suddenly appear ridiculous, unknowledgeable, inarticulate, or dogmatic. She deftly augments tensions, deliberately escalates disagreements. If the stage was set properly during the list-building phase, a well-trained provocateur will be able to really get most members of the group right where they want them. Individuals in opposition to a desired policy will find themselves shut out. The Delphi technique works, folks. It's effective with parents, teachers, school children, and community groups. The targets rarely, if ever, notice that they're being manipulated. If they do suspect what's happening, they generally don't know how to shut the process down. Suppose a desired policy is no failing grades, and suppose that policy is placed on the table. The provocateur utilizes a selective hearing process so that only those questions that support no failing grades will be placed on the table for discussion. The only opposing arguments permitted will be those that the provocateur deems helpful in escalating tensions later on. So, if you have an opposing view and you know that's not the preferred view, don't be taken in by the fact that this so-called facilitator acknowledges your suggestion. Remain on your guard. The provocateur, acting as moderator, guides the discussion so that it doesn't get away from him or her. This means that the facilitator operative frames the debate and is careful not to let go. Soon some participants begin to adopt the no failing grades idea as if it were their own and will be manipulated into pressuring the entire group into accepting that proposition. Basically, the consensus strategies like Delphi are based on Marx's theory of alienation, which states that folks will do just about anything to avoid being ostracized, ridiculed, or to otherwise lose face. What happens is that somewhere in the consensus building process there's a switch that confuses, numbs, and freezes normal responses. Aware that something's going wrong but unable to explain or define it, you find yourself tongue-tied. Linguistics professor Dean Gocher, director of the Institute of Authority Research, explains that there appears to be a trigger mechanism that cuts off awareness of impending danger and suppresses the ability to resist, resulting in indecision and eventually capitulation. Between the computer and word of mouth, it's fairly easy for a provocateur to pre-select individuals who are likely to go along with a proposal and thus to pack an audience. Participants against a facilitator-desired proposal are frequently included too, but they're screened in order to ensure they will not be particularly articulate, or that they will sound shrill in their voice, or hysterical, or that they have a reputation for being unorganized in their presentations. So, I hate to say this, but don't be overly flattered if you're asked to serve on a curriculum committee or a task force.